Thank you all for joining us for this wonderful virtual event, our panel Writers with Day Jobs, a virtual event about balancing creative work with actual work, featuring Ruth Madievsky and Rachel Taff, the two writers who wrote and sold novels while working other jobs. So if that's something that you are trying to do right now, if you want to do, I think this panel will be really wonderful for you. And I'm Krista Diamond, by the way. I'm a virtual program assistant here at Black Mountain Institute, and I'm also a writer who has held down many day jobs. This panel means a lot to me, and I hope that it will be really useful for all of you. Before we get started, I do want to plug our next virtual event. We always have a wonderful slate of virtual programming. It's free, it's open to the public. Our next virtual event is a conversation with Catherine Lacey. We're super excited about that. Free, open to the public, and you can register for that right now at blackmountaininstitute.org. While you're there, take a look at our other virtual and in-person events if you're local to Vegas or you're feeling like a vacation to Las Vegas, then add a few to your calendar. We also have a newsletter you can sign up for, social media, all kinds of things that will let you know what we're up to. So I want to thank our audience for being here, all of you lovely folks, as well as our event sponsors, Beverly Rogers, Miriam Shearing, the Rogers Foundation, and the College of Liberal Arts for making this programming possible. I also want to say that the University of Nevada, Las Vegas wishes to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities of this region and recognize that the university is situated on the traditional homelands of the Nuwu Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. We encourage everyone in this space to engage in continued learning about the indigenous peoples who work and live on this land since time immemorial, including the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Moapa Band of Paiutes. So our discussion today is about balancing writing with a day job. So if you've ever drafted a novel on a lunch break or revised poems on your commute or worked remotely at an artist residency where everybody else was making art for the entire time, that one I've done. So it feels if it feels specific, I've been there. So you know this struggle. And maybe you have strategies for making this work. Maybe you are fighting what feels like a losing battle to make space in your life for art. Whatever the case may be, I know this panel is going to be helpful because we have two really wonderful guests today who I'm going to introduce now. Ruth Madievsky's writing appears in The Atlantic, The Los Angeles Times, Harper's Bazaar, The Cut, GQ, Guernica, Kenyon Review, and elsewhere. She is the author of a poetry collection, Emergency Break, and a Tin House Summer Workshop scholar. She co-founded the Chabarovska Collective, a community of women and non-binary writers whose identities have been shaped by immigration from the Soviet Union to the United States. Originally from Moldova, she lives in Los Angeles, and her national best-selling novel, All Night Pharmacy, which I have here, won the National Jewish Book Award for debut fiction. Ruth is holding hers up too.
That virtual background is messing up, but y'all get the idea.
It's being eaten by the bookshelf. It was an Indie Next pick, hailed by the New York Times as tender and hilarious, and it was named a best/most anticipated 2023 book by over 45 venues. And she wrote it while working as an HIV and primary care clinical pharmacist. Also joining us is Rachel Taff, an author and television producer. Her debut novel, Paper Cut, publishes in spring 2025, and I can't wait to hold it just like I held Ruth's book. It sounds so amazing. It's publishing with William Morrow, HarperCollins in North America, and Corvus Atlantic Books in the UK. As the director of development at Dynamic Television, known for Ginny and Georgia and Drops of God, Rachel develops, sells, and produces television projects. While at Shoe Money Productions, helmed by Emmy-winning director Thomas Schlamme, Rachel developed projects for FX and managed a production slate including Snowfall, The Plot Against America, and a West Wing special. Additional television credits include Smilf, American Dad, and Fresh Off the Boat. Hailing from Atlanta, Rachel earned a media arts and entertainment degree at Elon University. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband. So yeah, we've got 2 Los Angeles-based panelists today. So I'm going to be moderating this discussion between Ruth and Rachel. While we chat, I encourage you to put any questions you have in that chat box. We do, towards the end of each event, we'll pivot to a Q&A, but you definitely don't have to save your questions until that moment. Just pop them in that chat as you think of them, and we'll get to your questions towards the end of the event. Now, please join me in virtually welcoming our wonderful panelists. A virtual round of applause. So I'd like to start off with just hearing a bit from both of you about your creative work and your day job. And if you could speak a little bit about what you might say is the relationship between those 2 aspects of your life.
Sure. Ruth, you want to go first?
Sure. So my day job is I'm a clinical pharmacist, which means that I don't work in a pharmacy. In my case, I work in different primary care clinics where I see patients by appointment. I basically help manage some of their chronic conditions like HIV, high blood pressure, diabetes. Kind of the idea being that for a lot of folks who need to see a clinician more frequently than like every 6 months or however often the doctor can see you, they see me in between, and I can change their medications, I can order labs, basically my job is to help make their lives better, both on like the health level and also on the quality of life level. So it's a very kind of extroverted, interpersonal sort of job, which I think works really well with being a writer in the sense that you have to be very detail oriented to be a clinical pharmacist. It involves a lot of empathy, a lot of trying to understand what is important to patients, what are they not doing right now that they wish they could be doing if their health were different, what motivates them, things like that. And all of that is also really helpful for developing characters. And so I started writing my novel while I was in pharmacy school in 2014, and then it just came out in 2023. So it kind of encompassed all of pharmacy school and then my first couple jobs as a clinical pharmacist. So it's been a journey.
Awesome. Well, my day job, like Krista said, I'm a television executive and producer, and for me, for what that means really is I am constantly looking for ideas to turn into TV, whether that's IP, whether that's spec scripts that come across my desk. I'm constantly meeting with writers and developing their ideas into shows that I can pitch to networks and make. So I think obviously one of the best ways this helps me be a writer is I talk about story all day. And I read a ton, and I'm constantly talking to other creatives and other writers. And I think, you know, as you get into trying to sell your own book, I have been doing the executive thing where I'm constantly pitching other writers and other ideas. So I feel like I know that sales hat a little bit too, just in representing myself. And yeah, and I started writing my novel back in 2020 when I was working for Tommy Shalami, who is the president of the Directors Guild, and we were tasked with figuring out how we can get the industry back to work. And so I was on Zoom calls with like Steven Soderbergh and all these virus doctors and trying to figure out how we could safely go back to set. And I was like, this is never going to happen. TV is dead. I might as well realize my lifelong dream of writing a novel. So I started during COVID when I had way more time. So I'll say that. And yeah, that's how it all came about.
So I feel like you're already speaking to my next question, which is like the kind of impossible question of like, how do you do this when you have to work? Like, everybody's answers are different to this. You know, sometimes your answers change. Some writers get up at 4 a.m. and write before work. Some write at night, some kind of squeeze in time on the job. Some don't have routines at all. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the strategies that you have for balancing writing from work, if you have strategies for that have worked for you.
Yeah, do you want me to jump in? So I think something that's a little bit unique, I guess, in my journey to publication, if you will, is I originally set out to work in TV to be a TV writer. And when you're doing that, you're working assistant jobs forever. Like I was an assistant for a long time. And it's kind of expected that if you want to be writing, you're going to be writing on your own time. And I feel like that was kind of always built in to my, my just thinking of how I would approach being able to write while also paying my bills. So it wasn't an entirely new thing for me when I started working on a novel, because I had been always working on television pilots and feature scripts on the side. But I think, for me, my biggest thing is working on the weekends. And that was a commitment I had to make to myself. And I think when you're going about taking this kind of leap of faith, you're going to have to, something is going to fall by the wayside. Something is going to have to be sacrificed, whether that's that last hour of sleep in the morning or my weekends. And to be honest, it was my weekends during the day. That's where I was. I was at the library or at a coffee shop. And I think when you talk about strategies, honestly, for me, the biggest struggle was making sure my personal life also got some time and that the people in my life that I care about understood the, commitment I was making to my writing, and they had to respect that, or they probably weren't going to be in my life. And to also learn to take care of myself and take breaks when I need it. But so for me, sometimes it's grabbing some time during lunch or whatever. I will say also, as a person with an LA commute, I would really try to have the commute be interesting for me. And what that would mean is I am taking voice notes as I'm driving about ideas of characters. And I am also, I would be like listening back to, I forget what app it was, but there's like an app that reads back your work. And I would do that on my commute as well, just so it was always kind of in my head. But yeah, I don't know. How about you, Ruth?
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's always such like a jarring but necessary reminder that like you have to put in the work. Like there's kind of no life hack. It's working on the weekends. It's, doing the voice notes while you're driving. Like there's kind of no magic key. It just often comes down to like grit and persistence and getting your ass in the chair. It's funny, my answer to this is so different now than what it was just a year ago, because I had a baby in last April. So everything, the way I write has like completely transformed now since she entered the picture. So I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about this because it kind of feels like my life is all kept together by this like, popsicle stick statue I've made with like spit and glue because she's still so little. And I do work full time, and I'm working on a second novel. So, I mean, in terms of how I make it happen, probably the biggest thing is that my day job is like very much an 8 to 5 with like absolutely no overtime, like very, very strict boundaries around work. Like when it's 5 p.m., like I don't exist anymore in that realm. Like no one can I mean, if someone needed to reach me in an emergency, they could, but like no one's gonna reach me, like fully offline, no brain space going toward that healthcare mind, which is really helpful for protecting my time and my creative energy. I also work remotely 4 days a week. So I see patients by appointment through often Zoom or telemedicine. That's huge because I very often write during my lunch break. I don't have a commute, so I can write a little bit in the morning and or can sleep in a little bit and have more energy to write in the evening. And then just in terms of like making it work with a young baby under 1, I used to be the kind of writer where when I wrote, I have to polish every word like a stone, and I'm perfecting it as I go, so that by the time I have a first draft, maybe it's taken a few years, but it's already like, it might, like, the actual content might be garbage, but at least on a sentence level, it's like really working. It feels like it's almost there. Now I can't do that anymore. I feel like I don't have the mental acuity right now to perfect as I go. So I really just write like there's a gun to my head every time I sit down to write. I've been leaning into word count goals a lot more. So as I'm starting to work on a second novel, I started off trying to do 500 words a few days a week. Then I upped it to 1,000 words a few days a week. Now I aim for like 1,500 a few days a week. And that then gives me flexibility, because then if my kid is sick or something, then for a week or two I might not write anything. But then um I kind of set this goal for when I want to have a first draft by, even like a terrible first draft, but just kind of words on the page. So I find that very freeing, because then even if you can't quite assess how good the quality is, at least like you have something that you can play with. And it's just kind of proof of your labor, day in and day out. And I feel like I really need that right now. I'm also very, very selective about what I spend my writing time on. So there have been lots of like pitch ideas I've had for like personal essays or newsy things, but I really try to do like a come to Jesus myself every time of like, do I want to spend, the like 20 to 30 hours it's probably going to take me to do a first draft of this essay, do all the edits. If it's nonfiction reporting, there's fact checking. I'm going to be going back and forth with an editor, and the kind of places that I'm have worked with, like they edit you within an inch of your life, which is amazing. It's such a gift, but like you have to have like the mental stamina and bandwidth for that, and also the time to, basically edit almost every line of your, whatever it is, an op-ed or a personal essay. So I really like try not to take on anything that I'm not super, super passionate about, which does mean saying no to a lot of cool things. Like I got asked to judge a book prize earlier that sounded really cool, but I just like don't have the time to read 200 books for this prize, while also reading the books I want to read for myself and my writing. So I try to be really intentional about what I spend my time with. And a lot of the books that I've been reading lately, the newer books, are writers that I think I might want to interview. And when I take like my baby on walks or I'm driving, I'm thinking about what are the interview questions I could ask, who could I pitch it to. So there's a lot of kind of like you, Rachel, a lot of like writing tangential stuff, even when I'm not at the computer, that then helps make the computer part more productive. And then I think because I also work outside of the writing world, I really use FOMO as a motivating factor. Like that was really helpful with getting the novel written, was the sense that like all my friends in MFA programs and PhDs or who are professors, like they're all doing all this writing related stuff without me. They're all getting amazing educations. They have, maybe built-in time to write. They're getting workshops. They're meeting with all these writers I admire. I can't go to this 2 o'clock reading. I'm at work. So I've found that very motivating to I do have when I do have the opportunity to write, like really using it to feel like I have to like catch up with other people. So very, very long answer, but yeah, I kind of use every possible tool in the arsenal to get any writing done.
Yeah,
That's
that. I'm also a writer in that way, where I've spent so much time brainstorming when I'm not even on the page, that like I tend to be the person who like, and granted, there's sometimes where it's just about bum and chair, but I need to like also build myself up so I'm so excited to write. So I think, and in a weird similar way, I get your FOMO part of it, because part of my job is also I'm talking to all these writers and I'm their champion, but I'm also like, my dirty secret is I'm also a writer. So when I'm there, I really want to show up for myself and my own creative voice, and kind of walk the walk that I've been talking about. I just wanted to say about your word count thing that it's always so different when you're in drafting mode versus revision mode too. And I'm a writer who loves deadlines, even if it's like, even I have to self-impose deadlines, or nobody is ever going to care more about your writing than you do. And so I have to set deadlines for myself, and sometimes it can help me to be, have some kind of outside accountability. Like I've worked with some writing critique partners or in writing groups, or like now that I'm working with an editor, it's like it's a real deadline, but
Mhm.
I think also just having those times for those things and for myself also just really helps me in planning and time management.
Totally. And yeah, I meant to mention that I also have accountability partners who I'll email with back and forth. Like maybe we're both working on a book. And so we'll either email each other once a week with how much time or how many words we spent on the book. Or with All Night Pharmacy, I had a friend where we made a goal to write 500 words a day every day. And we would email them to each other. We wouldn't even always read each other's entries, but just that act of like, today I have to email Emily, really got me to do it.
That's great. That's so great. And I loved what you were saying, Ruth, about like, well, I didn't love this, but I think it's a great point, about having to miss out on like writing related events and things when you're working full time. Like that's that's so important that you brought that up, because things like residencies, even like MFAs, you know, like disrupting your life for a few, whether it's disrupting your life for a few years to go to a writing program, or a few months to go to a residency, or even like getting a few hours to go to a reading, like those are definitely an important part of the writing experience that sometimes you have to miss out on, and you get that FOMO. So that's so great that you've got like the accountability partner, and you're still doing it, despite that. And I also think it's really interesting that one of you is kind of working in this sort of related field, even though you know, as you said, Rachel, like you kind of get that FOMO yourself, like seeing other people and championing other people's work and wanting to work on your own work. But you still also get like the excitement of being around writers and other creatives. Whereas Ruth, you work in this unrelated field. So I'm curious, maybe we can start with Ruth, if you could talk about what effect that has on you working in an unrelated field. Any like advantages, disadvantages, kind of surprising things that you've gotten from that as a writer.
Yeah, my tone on this has like really changed the farther I've gotten along in my um, career in pharmacy, where going into pharmacy school, I was very, very angsty because, you know, I had friends going into MFA programs and planning to do PhDs. And I felt very like, I don't want to say like persecuted because it was a choice that I was making, but, you know, I went into pharmacy because I'm from an immigrant family. I was born in Moldova, mostly raised in LA, but I was really raised with this mindset of like, stability. Stability is the most important thing because like any day now we're going to get pulled back to the shtetl. You know, it's all is lost, you know, and you need to find a way to kind of, you know, remake a life from the financial ruins or something. You know, there was always this kind of fear that from talking to a lot of my immigrant friends is pretty common in our communities, which is a lot of the reason why I went into pharmacy was because I've always liked science. I wanted a job where I felt like I was helping people every day, but I also wanted something very, very stable, you know, the kind of thing you could count on. Um, and so in pharmacy school, though, I felt so like oppressed, you know, that I didn't get to go to the readings at 2 p.m. on, you know, on the same campus or whatever. And I could never do the residencies. And but now that I'm actually like, you know, I've kind of since realized that like graduate school is just horrible for a lot of people, and pharmacy school is just not fun at all. But now that I'm working and I have this really good work-life balance where work ends at 5 and like that's it, like no exceptions. Um, I now find it really, really freeing to have a job that has nothing to do with writing. Um, and a job that can support me outside of writing, because now I don't feel this pressure to write things that are super commercial or to, you know, sell a book or a piece by any particular timeline. I can kind of follow my own interests and passions and write what I want. And I don't have to like, you know, please a tenure committee or, you know, think about, I think, forming a career as a writer in the same way. I feel like I can play more and it takes a lot of the pressure off. So I find that very helpful to not have to rely on my writing as a source of income. And then because of that, to only work on what I want to.
Yeah. What about you, Rachel? Are there any kind of surprises, advantages, disadvantages to working in a related field?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely pros and cons, and what comes to mind for me is, you know, one of the biggest goals in me, even writing a book from the beginning, was I wanted to have my own IP I could control as a person who loves television, has been working in television, and one of my biggest goals is to get my novels adapted and to do that myself. And what I think is helpful, it's interesting hearing you Ruth, talk about like, oh, I don't need to be focused on what's commercial, what people are asking for, where I'm constantly talking to buyers who are saying, we'll do shows in this vein or in this vein, and I'm hearing kind of what the market really does want. And even though I obviously always have to try to find something personal within my stuff, like I think I just inherently have this, I have that knowledge around me that it's almost like by osmosis, like these things just get into my writing of, oh, I know that that would be difficult for a buyer or to set up somewhere, or no, we wouldn't be doing XYZ, or there's no buyers for that. Like I already kind of have that industry knowledge, which can be a, you know, a blessing and a curse. And then I'll also just say, I think, you know, what's interesting for me is being a better executive has made me a better writer and vice versa. Because, you know, and something that I've just been starting to get into a little bit more is, you know, when you're an author, you're also running your own business, and there's being a writer and doing the important creative work, but there's also being an author and like advocating for yourself and, you know, self-promotion and getting your business stuff all done. And I feel like the producer side of me has a good handle on like what that means, in a way that, I think is comparable to like the kinds of things that you're asked to do as an author. And then, but it's also just, it was interesting hearing you, Ruth, too, of no commute, and then you don't take your work at home with you. I was like, wow, I would love that. I definitely take my work home with me, which has been a challenge because I care, because I'm a writer, I care so much about the writers I work with. And I feel, and my bosses have even been like, you can get a little too attached. Like you also have to be a suit sometimes. And I think when something's going on with one of my writers, or things are going well, or things are going haywire, it's hard for me to not be you know, emotionally invested and take that home. Or also I'm whining and dining actors to try at night to try to get them to sign on to our projects. So like, that's why during the week, it's just kind of hard for me to write. I just, so it definitely has an effect. But you know, I can't deny that it can feel so insular of, and in working in Hollywood especially is such a bubble of, you know, I'm not interfacing with a lot of people who have, I don't want to say normal jobs, but just jobs that don't seem so niche that I've never heard of before I moved to LA, you know? So I think, and I think you can see that in my first book. It's set in LA, and it deals with a lot about fame and people in the entertainment industry. So there's obviously crossover when you write what you know. It's hard to get away from that.
I'm so excited to read it.
Thank you.
Me too. And speaking of writing what you know, I'm wondering if you could both talk about the ways that work shows up in your fiction. If that has any influence on how you craft your characters' lives, their professions, knowing their commutes even.
Yeah, totally. I mean, with All Night Pharmacy, I knew that I wanted to write about people who were scheming and grifting and kind of living for extremity. And it just felt kind of natural to write about like a pharmaceutical scam, and that basically involves our narrator. She cooks up this scheme with a pharmacy tech at the All Night Pharmacy, within the hospital where she works in the emergency room, where basically the tech, who's in charge of disposing of all the expiring pills, she pockets some of like the expiring opioids and stimulants and benzos, like the kind of things that have street value. And then the narrator resells them at this like scuzzy bar called Salvation. And, you know, I felt like I could speak to how something like that would get pulled off because I know about like the triplicate sheets that get sent to the DEA and how waste disposal works because like it was drilled into me in pharmacy school and I was tested on my boards. And it just, I mean, part of that was like intrigue and kind of the challenge of coming up with how a scheme like that would work. And the other part was like it just felt easier than like thinking of some completely unrelated industry scam and having to like delve into the archives and figure out how it would work. Like this just kind of felt organic. Um, and then I also wrote about like substance dependence to opioids and benzodiazepines in the book. And that's something that I've encountered a fair amount in my work. And I help people taper off of benzos. So I was pretty kind of intimately aware of how hard that can be and how someone can develop a dependence through absolutely no moral failing. And addiction is not a moral failing at all. And I wanted to show how these things can happen and how societal circumstances can contribute to that and how a person can try to come out on the other side. So my knowledge was really helpful for that there. And yeah, just it's hard to not like, you know, I feel like I'm steeped in that environment like tea all day. And so it's hard for, you know, random health stuff to not come in everywhere all over the book. And I think that's always kind of a blessing to have your own unique lexicon that's filtered through your worldview. And I'm sure I'm guaranteed they're out there, but I can't say I really am in contact with many other writer pharmacists. So I feel like I have, you know, kind of a particular angle here, especially as someone who works kind of in the HIV and recovery space sometimes.
I imagine there must be pharmacists in your life who have read your book who are happy that you got things right, or at the very least, you don't have a bunch of people from that field in your inbox telling you that you got it wrong.
Honestly, I wish more of my pharmacist coworkers would read it. I feel like a lot of them are like, oh, we don't read. I've had a lot more of like my husband's lawyer friends and coworkers read it, interestingly.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing that. It's funny, when you ask that, I'm like, so much of work, and this obviously is a reflection of me, of, you know, so many of the characters really identify themselves with work in my novel because it's so much about fame and performance. And so I was thinking about, okay, who are all the people? What are all their jobs? There's like a true crime icon slash memoirist. Her mother's a famous photographer. Her sister is like a rock star. There's a drag queen. There's a publicist. Like it's all in that world of having to do with the machine of fame and the machine of true crime as entertainment. So it's ingrained that it's funny for me to even think about a character who doesn't identify with work themselves as what they do. And I think that's also just a you know, it is you are a product of your environment, and working in this field, that's how people carry themselves and identify themselves, is really by their job, and they take pride in it, and they're also insecure about it. So there's also an assistant, like, and you see these people on their own trajectories trying to get to a certain level. And I think that's just being around a lot of ambitious people, a lot of people with lofty dreams who are trying to make them happen. And those are all things that I've seen in my job. So yeah, kind of impossible to separate, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And thinking about it, there's like so many books and movies and TV shows that are about writers because people tend to write what they know. So it's such an advantage knowing something a little different.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to ask like something that I think comes up for a lot of writers when you tell people in your life, especially people who aren't writers, that you are a writer, they'll say like, oh, well, when you write that best-selling novel, you can quit your day job and you can just be rich and famous and just write full time. And that happens for some people, but unfortunately, we are not all Stephen King or somebody else who's super, super famous that gets to do that full time, that would be wonderful if we all got to experience that. But that kind of fantasy of uninterrupted writing time and fame, and if you want that, and wealth, is often a fantasy for people. So I'm curious, like, once you feel like you've sold that, you've both sold novels, what does that look like, and what do you say to people who are like, now you just get to be famous and do this full time forever? What does the reality look like once you've had some success as a writer and are still working?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, for most of us, don't get to quit your day job, nor would I want to, frankly, because, I find it very fertile ground for my writing. And like I mentioned, it takes so much of the pressure off to be able to write what I want with only self-imposed deadlines. Um, I mean, what's a nice thing about my novel coming out is that now it has been easier to land certain pieces. Like I find that editors who didn't respond to my pitches before, suddenly some of them are responding, and they're kind of, it's a lesser leap of faith to let me work on something than it would have been before when I was like a little more unproven. Um, so that's been really nice, and it's having the novel out has helped me feel just internally like more of a peer with some of the writers I admire, because that was always a really hard thing for me before I even had a novel draft, was just this feeling like the writers I admire are up here and I'm all the way down here, and any time they're nice to me, they're just doing it out of charity. I'm a nobody. Like that, the imposter syndrome was really hard, and just reading into all the interactions so much. Especially like I went to a few writing workshops, and um I would often have like great rapport with, the writer that I was studying with, but I was always like, are they just being nice to me because I'm paying them to? Are they just saying that this is worth continuing to work on because like I'm helping them like with their mortgage? And it's not that I actually am that cynical, but like, that stuff is hard, I think, when you're starting out and you're so hungry to be kind of in the same league as the writers you admire and to make readers feel the way that your favorite books make you feel. So I definitely still have plenty of my own version of imposter syndrome, but it feels very good to be on the other side of having produced something. Um, but yeah, I mean, financially, like there's absolutely no, like we just did our taxes, like there's absolutely no way that this would be, um, like I would be so financially precarious if I didn't have this. But I mean, one kind of, something that kind of can cut both ways is that because I have this day job that supports me, and I was in a nice position of not like needing a huge book advance to justify working on the book. It was a book that I wanted to work on no matter what. And I had some conversations where, with Catapult, which is an indie publisher, like they can't offer the kind of book advance that like, an imprint at like the Big Five could sometimes. And I had some conversation with Big Five editors who were interested in seeing like kind of a revised version of the novel that had more of a commercial bent and was more focused on like addiction and sisterhood and less so like queerness and intergenerational trauma and this trip to Moldova that happens in my book that's like a little bit mystical. And I'm happy that I wasn't in a position where I felt the need to like follow the money and write a different book, that I got to write the book I wanted for a smaller advance. And that was my choice. I was happy with that.
Yeah, let's see. It's interesting. I feel like my book hasn't come out yet, and I also have to write a second book that will come out the following year. I signed a 2-book deal, which I'm nervous about, but excited. And so I haven't felt like as proven yet, but I'll say like, I think as a creative in general, I'm just gonna venture to say even those bestsellers are waiting for like the day that nobody's gonna pay them to write anymore. And you're always gonna feel a pressure, no matter what position you're in. I mean, you listen to interviews and stuff from authors who have been writing books for years, and I think there's always that nervousness. So I don't feel like I would ever even feel, I think as a creative, you're always really reaching for that next thing anyway. And you're always going to probably be looking back at your past work being like, I could have done that a little better. So, and I think that's the thing that I love about being a writer and about being a creative, is that there's always more work to be done, and you're always going to be like evolving and learning as you go. As far as like the balance of, if you're gonna, how successful you're gonna be and what that fantasy looks like. I mean, for me, and I think it was, I forget, I would butcher her last name, but the author of Notes on an Execution, which is one of my favorite books ever. I read an interview with her a while back that has stuck with me. And she is also a literary agent and a novelist. And she
Danya
quit her.
Kofna, right? Yeah, I
Yes.
don't know if that's how you pronounce
Yes.
her name, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I thought her story was really interesting. She had this interview that was like, for one book, she actually stopped agenting and was just focusing on writing. And she was saying, like, if you do that, your day is solely dependent on how well you wrote that day, which sounds kind of terrifying to me, because if you have a great writing day, then you think you're amazing and you're the queen of the world. But then the next day you get to your desk and there's nothing there, and there's no contribution you've made that day, and your whole day feels bad. And we've all had those writing days. So part of me, like, and I don't know exactly what my future will be, but I feel like I need to have something where I'm using other parts of my brain to not feel like there's just pressure on me to be productive creatively. Like, nobody can just turn on a switch and say at 9 a.m. I am going to be writing an amazing scene. Sometimes it just doesn't work that way. Sometimes you get there and you're writing a really crappy version of the ending, and you didn't address that scene. So I think for me, trying to find a balance of like, I know that I have other skills besides just being on the page. So trying to find ways that I can use my brain differently, I think can also relieve a little bit of that pressure, and also make me feel like a more well-rounded human at the end of the day. So I'm not just assigning all of my value and all of my self-worth to the quality of my writing that I'm producing.
Yeah,
Um,
I resonate with so much of that resonates with me too. And um yeah, I get a lot of, it's important to me to like come home from work feeling like I helped other people in some way. And I'm sure you feel that too with when you're bringing like art, to the theater, you're helping make other people's dreams come true too. And bringing like great content for people. And it's important for me to come home feeling like I helped improve someone's life in some way. And for that reason too, that it also makes it easier to write without feeling like this is all you did today. This is your only contribution to society. And I also, the days that I have had the time to write for like 5, 6, 7, 8 hours in a row, it's horrible. Like, I mean, it works for some people, but like, I hate it. Like, whenever I talk to writers who do write full time, where it's like, they write from like 9 to 4 or something like that, but they try to get in like 8 hours. Like, I can't do that. Like, I feel like writing for me is so physical and mental at the same time. Like, I really can't do more than a few hours of it in a day without feeling just like exhausted, angry at nobody, like ripping my hair out. Um, so it would be kind of like silly for me to almost like just try to write full time, because like what would I do? Like, I feel like I'd just be reading the rest of the time, and then I'd be upset that I'm not making money during that time because I'm just reading.
Yeah, I totally feel that way. And I'm definitely of the school of, I know people say write every day. I don't have that in me all the time. And similarly, a good writing day for me is honestly 3 hours of being focused. I will feel great after that. And if I keep trying to go more, like sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. So what are you doing with the other 21 hours of your day? And I'll also just say, like, I think it's also just important, even if you do eventually go into full-time writing, you need to like be outside of yourself, like being outside in the world, interacting with other people. Like, it sounds like, Ruth, you get so much from all of these all of your patients, and I'm sure working with other people. And similarly, I'm a social person, so I need to like get story, otherwise nothing's gonna happen in my home except whatever my husband has to say, which I'm sure sometimes that could bring story. But
Yeah.
you know, you need to be interacting with people and getting out of your own comfort zone too, and just otherwise, what are you going to be writing about?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
also am like, well, not to like, I don't want to like side eye anybody who's like a very prolific writer, but I also like I don't need the temptation to put out like a book a year or a book every 2 years, which I feel like if I didn't have something else sucking up so much of my time, if I'm really writing 500, 1,000, 1,500 words a day, like the amount of manuscripts I would produce would be insane. And I feel like I need some hard stops there because there is sometimes a quality decrease when writers, even writers I deeply, deeply admire, are putting out book every few years. And that's what the market wants from them. So I can't blame them for feeling like they should do it, especially if they have an idea and the people want the idea. But it's always a bummer when you really like admire a writer and you feel like their books kind of do less and less for you over time sometimes. So I don't need that kind of um market demand.
And you want to feel connected to your work, and whatever you're putting out there, you want to really believe in it. And sometimes those things take time to gestate. I've been living with the story of Paper Cut since like 2019, and it's coming out next year. So like, what does that tell you?
Yeah.
Um, I'm honestly very interested in. I'm supposed to write another book. And that's going to be really interesting for me. It'll be a very different experience from like only having my own accountability to, having a contract and trying to figure out that. So it'll be interesting. I know for sure my process and also just my emotional state, with it is going to be very different from writing the first book, because there's somebody that has already bought it. So that's already a different experience.
This has been so like uplifting in such like a surprising and delightful way. We could have definitely like talked about like how frustrating like commutes are and things like that, which would have been totally fine. But I love like the way that you've both kind of identified having like working lives and having like what people call like getting outside and touching grass as kind of like a sort of superpower that makes you a better artist. So I want to pivot to our Q&A for the rest of our time, because I see a really, really great question from Libby that I would love to hear your thoughts on. So Libby says, when inspiration strikes or an interesting idea pops to mind, what are the ways you take note of it while in the middle of work / when you're preoccupied? Do you carry a notebook, write it in an app, or something else? Does either of you have any kind of like go-to way of dealing with that?
Usually, I mean, sometimes in my phone, definitely in my phone notes, and then also on my commute when I'm using my voice notes, I do that a lot. And then, but honestly, like I'm not that kind of person. Usually, if an idea is sticking with me, I'm gonna keep thinking about it and I'm gonna remember it. Sometimes turns of phrase or things like that, that's something that I need to write down right then. But if it's like an idea, I'm going to continue to ponder on it probably for a while just in my own head before I get to the page, really. I don't know. What about you, Ruth?
Yeah, I usually don't get like swept up in these moments of like the muse is here, like jog to my computer,
Yeah.
write something down. It's writing for me tends to be a lot more like exercise than it is like, oh, I got an idea. But oftentimes it's like images that come to mind. Like, I'll get this image of like an octopus with like a tentacle in a peanut jar or something, and I'll like, write that in a phone note, or if I'm at my desk at home, I have like a notebook in front of me. Um, and yeah, I mean, once in a while, an idea will pop in my head, like, oh, like I should write an op-ed about this. This is something I've been like chewing on, and I finally found the angle, and then I might like really quickly type it into like a draft in Gmail so I don't forget it.
But yeah, I feel like for me, it's always been more about like cultivating the kind of mindset in life where kind of invite the muse to show up rather than kind of waiting for inspiration to strike.
Yeah, kind of treating writing like work, which it definitely sometimes can be. So Matt asks, what do each of you consider your writing education, where you learned the craft? Did you take classes while working or some other way that you got your writing education?
I grew up in the theater, so I actually started playwriting that was my first foray into everything. And I took some courses at NYU, and then I've also done a lot more TV writing courses, which and done those at UCLA and a couple of other intensives and things. Also studied media arts in school, but not like a particular MFA or anything in creative writing. But and then I did a novel writing course online during COVID with Michelle Richmond. It was like a novel in 9 months or something course. And I think it was really just it was teaching me structure more than anything. But I think most of my education has been honestly through work, working on TV shows and reading. I don't know how many scripts throughout the years.
Yeah, I love that we both didn't come from like kind of formal writing education backgrounds because I feel like it shows a model to people that you don't have to do that, and it's okay if you either don't get to do it or you choose not to. We kind of all find our way here in a way that's right for us. Yeah, for me, I was a bio major, and in undergrad, I mean, I've always loved to read and write, so I took humanities classes where I could. I took a few writing workshops in undergrad. And then during pharmacy school, I did the Tin House Summer Writers Workshop a couple summers. There was like a poetry professor from my college who was doing kind of one-off workshops in her apartment. So I was doing that with a group. And then I would go to a lot of readings when I could and like at panels like this, and would just, furiously write in my notebook when people said things that I found useful and just read a ton. And being on Twitter, may it sort of rest in peace, has been super helpful too, because that's really where I found so much of my writing community. And just getting to like eavesdrop, in like the literary town square of like, what are people reading? What are people recommending? What essays are people sharing? What novels are kind of captivating people? I've gotten so many reading recommendations from that and really learned how to be a writer from watching how other people do it. Like I learned how to write personal essays just from reading a ton of them, and most of them came from things that I saw other people were posting online. So there's definitely so many ways to be both self-taught by just reading really voraciously, um, and so many like free resources out there, or like Tin House had a scholarship, which is how I got to go the first year. So yeah, it's just kind of about like finding your community, and then those people kind of tell you about more opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, I was also going to say, I know this isn't a class, but honestly, I listened to, if you haven't listened to this podcast, it's the shit no one tells you about writing. And that is literally how I learned how to write a query letter that got me my agent. And I learned a ton from that because, so I highly recommend that podcast because that's free. There you go.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's such a great resource. Thanks for sharing that. Because that's definitely something if you're not in like an academic environment or you're not like from like a background where you have lots of writers in your life, you got to learn that some other way. So Autumn asks, how do you access or maintain connection to other writers or deal with issues at work that impact your creativity?
Well, connection for writers, for me, a lot of it came from both doing workshops like Tin House and then just so much from like social media. I mean, like, a thing that I would do then and still do now is when I read something by someone that I really like, I'll often just DM them and say like, "Oh my God, I love this essay that you wrote about whatever." And I've made a lot of like genuine friends that way. Um, and yeah, just like from following people, seeing what they're up to, oftentimes it becomes mutual. Um, and then those people end up being the ones that read first drafts of my work or who I thought someone asked a question about how we got our literary agents. Mine was through a friend. I wasn't even necessarily looking to start querying my book yet, but a friend who's a novelist mentioned that she has a friend who's kind of a young and hungry agent and who thinks might be really into the novel I was working on. And so I feel like I got to sidestep a huge, really rough part of the writing process by just meeting with that agent, and we just vibed so well, and she signed me, and kind of the rest is history. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then for me, similarly with social media, and I've been definitely DMing more authors more. And I will also just say, in general, the authors in the publishing community, everybody has been so friendly, which is not always something I'm used to in Hollywood. So people are very open about telling you their experience, which has been lovely. And then also, honestly, going to book events and
Mhm.
introducing myself afterwards and asking people for coffee, like doing all of that. I have an author, I'm friendly with a bookstore, meeting these booksellers, and I'm hosting like an author happy hour there this week with an author friend of mine who we're just gonna try to meet people. And then, I think it's the basic principles of networking. As soon as you introduce somebody to somebody, say, who can I introduce you to, and have it snowball.
Yeah, and
Um,
also just not treating other writers as your competition, I think is really important. Of just, making space for any other, debut writers, making space for yourself too. It's just, I think that so much of the literary world is like an economy of favors, and we're all just kind of, we're all pre-ordering each other's books back and forth, until the day we die, and showing up at each other's events. And, I just think it's really good for your mental health to not see anybody else's success as somehow endangering yours. Um, and to just be
yeah.
genuinely happy for people and support them. And I always tell people, like, if I've written somewhere where you want to write for, like, message me. Like, I'll tell you who the editor was. Like, I'm happy to share my pitches for places, because I just feel like it's like, why be secretive about it? Um,
Yeah.
you
I
know.
love that.
Yeah, that generosity is such a wonderful part of the writing community. And I also want to do a quick plug for we did an event for folks who are asking about literary agents. We did do an event with 2 literary agents, a virtual program last year that I think should be available on our YouTube. So definitely take a look at that if you're looking for a literary agent. So I think we have time for maybe one more question, if that's cool with you guys. Um, I really like this question from Allie. How do you find the energy and motivation to write at night after a long work day, or how did you manage a morning routine before work? Such a good question. If either of you have thoughts on that.
To be honest, I can't do either of those things. I am a weekend writer right now. And that's because it takes it out of me. There's been times, of course, where I've had to get something done. And I think it's really about learning to leave work at work. But I'm not the best at that. So I don't have the best answer to that because I don't do it.
Um, I want to just plug something that I wanted to plug at some point, if it came up or not, which is that, realistically, like, almost all of us writers, like probably 99% of us, are going to have a full-time job to support ourselves, unless there's some other form of finances coming in. And so I am a big supporter of finding a full-time job that, compensates you well and gives you that separation, work-life balance. Even though sometimes it might mean like a big commitment up front, like, pharmacy school was a lot. I would never push anyone into like the health sciences if that's not your cup of tea. But, the like intense freedom that I feel now, after having been done with grad school, to now have just all of my time is mine after I leave work. And that's like such a blessing. Um, and yeah, in terms of when I write it, usually now that I have a kid, it's lunch breaks. I don't have it in me to get up any earlier than she wakes up. And it's in the evening when she goes to sleep. Sometimes, I mean, my husband has to do some work from home for his job, and so sometimes we're just, he's working at the desk, I'm working from bed. It's kind of motivating to look over at the other person with their cup of tea and kind of talk about what we're doing. Um, but But yeah, if anyone here is curious about balancing a completely unrelated to writing job, and I'm happy to feel free to like message me on Twitter or something and we can talk about it. Yeah, because I'm a big proponent of kind of unconventional combinations of things that open you up to writing.
Yeah. And honestly, we could also do like a whole separate panel on balancing writing with being a parent. So it's
Yeah,
incredible
I
that
would be
you
the first to register for that.
yeah, it's incredible that you're doing both. That's definitely something that we can talk about someday. And I hope to. So we're just at about time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. I know there are so many questions. Sorry for those who we didn't get to, but I hope that everyone got something useful from this. I know I did, and like I said, I think this was really like wonderfully uplifting. I'm so grateful to both of you for being here and sharing your experience. Definitely everyone who's here, we'd love to see you at future virtual events. If you're in Vegas or feel like being in Vegas, come to our in-person events. Buy Ruth's book. It's so good. Buy Rachel's book when it comes out and Rachel's next book when it comes out after that. Excited for all of that work to be in the world. And yeah, thank you everyone again. Have a wonderful evening. Maybe we'll all go do some writing after this. I know I definitely will. So a round of applause virtually for Ruth and Rachel, and for our wonderful audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can't wait for your book, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. I love your book.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.
Bye. Thank you all.